Melania Trump destroys, host The View over. After Melania Trump sues for 100 mailers, she redecorated the Rose Garden like she was flipping a foreclosed condo. That line, dripping in sarcasm, was Joy Behar's opening volley on a now infamous episode of The View. The target, Melania Trump. The tone, brutal. The aftermath still unfolding. It started like any other roundtable, a few headlines, some political banter, and the usual middle-aged giggles meant to soften the edge of whatever bomb they were about to drop. But this segment, it wasn't funny. It wasn't light. It was personal and calculated. She doesn't want to be First Lady, Whoopi added. She can't even decorate a Christmas tree without pouting. Sunny Hostin chimed in not to disagree but to escalate. She sleeps in a different wing. She's a hostage with a designer wardrobe. The studio laughed. The audience clapped. But outside those walls, something was brewing. Melania Trump had been silent for months, barely seen, rarely heard, and often written off as aloof or indifferent. But this time, she wasn't going to let it go. Within 72 hours, her legal team filed a defamation lawsuit against ABC and the three hosts individually. The damages $100 million, the claim malicious, unfounded character assassination dressed up as feminist banter. And just like that, The View wasn't just a show, it was a courtroom. In the days following the episode, social media erupted. Clips of the segment circulated like wildfire. Twitter hashtags popped up, to star Melania speaks, she sue The View, to hostile Hostin. Pundits were divided. Some defended the host, claiming satire, freedom of speech, late-night style commentary. Others called it targeted harassment. But one clip stood above the rest. It came not from the show, but from the raw feed leaked by a stagehand. In it, Joy turns to Sunny off mic and whispers, "She's fair game." Trophy wives don't get privacy. That moment caught unintentionally changed the tone. It wasn't just commentary, it was contempt. Melania's legal team pounced. In a statement released through her spokesperson, she said, "Being First Lady is not a shield from scrutiny, but it should not be a license for cruelty." This was not comedy, it was character destruction. Sunny Hostin went on CNN to defend herself. She's a public figure. We criticized Michelle, Hillary, Jill, why is Melania exempt, but the comparison backfired. Conservative media pointed out that no major host had ever accused Michelle Obama of hating her husband on live TV. No one ever implied Jill Biden was a hostage in her marriage. The backlash intensified. The Federalist wrote, "This isn't commentary, it's hate disguised as wit." Megyn Kelly joined the chorus. If Joy Behar said this about Michelle, she'd be fired before the next commercial break. Even some liberals cringed. "I'm not a Trump fan," one commentator wrote, "but what they did to Melania was low. We can do better." Melania, typically silent, released a rare video. Wearing a navy dress, standing in front of the American flag, she spoke plainly, "I have remained quiet because I believe dignity speaks louder than insult. But silence is not submission, and I will not allow my name to be trampled for applause." The video went viral. It was clipped, remixed, turned into TikToks and Reels. For the first time since leaving the White House, Melania Trump wasn't being talked about. She was talking, and people listened. The $100 million lawsuit became more than a legal headline. It became a cultural debate. Was Melania right to fight back, or was this a dangerous precedent where feelings overruled free speech, the country split? Progressives mocked the lawsuit as an overreaction. Conservatives rallied behind her, calling her the most bullied First Lady in history. Independents weren't sure who to side with, but many agreed The View had crossed a line. Behind the scenes, ABC's legal team scrambled. They issued a boilerplate defense. The views expressed by our hosts are protected under the First Amendment. But privately, executives were furious. Joy, Sunny, and Whoopi were instructed to avoid commenting further. The next 3 episodes of The View opened without Melania's name once being mentioned. Too late. Melania's legal team launched Phase 2 depositions. Emails, text messages, off-air recordings, and what they found was gold. An internal email from a producer surfaced, "Let's do another segment dragging Melania. Viewership spikes every time." In another, a talent booker wrote, "Melania bashing gets engagement. Whoopi's comments last week got us trending." More of that. Suddenly, it wasn't just about one episode, it was about a pattern, a culture. a strategy built not on political critique but personal vendettas disguised as punchlines. And Melania Trump, dismissed as ornamentalized as irrelevant, was now holding the cards. The mood at ABC was far from celebratory. Conference rooms that once echoed with confidence now sat heavy with unease. The lawsuit wasn't going away, and neither was Melania Trump. Within days of the filing, federal subpoenas landed on the desks of senior producers and legal counsels. What began as a media spectacle had evolved into a full-scale discovery operation. Every off-air email, text, and planning document that even mentioned Melania was requested. The show was about to go under oath. Legal counsel representing ABC met with the hosts separately. Whoopi Goldberg was reportedly defiant, confident that free speech would shield her. Joy Behar was anxious, caught between her on-screen bravado and the very real possibility of being deposed under penalty of perjury. Sunny Hostin, a former federal prosecutor herself, had the legal foresight to know exactly how serious it had become. And Melania, she remained largely out of sight, but her legal team worked with surgical precision. They filed motions, publicized select findings, and leaked just enough material to keep the pressure on. One clip released by her attorneys showed a backstage conversation in which producers celebrated the Melania segment for spiking YouTube engagement. "She's gold for hate clicks," one staffer laughed. The public was divided. Networks aired dueling opinion panels. Civil liberties groups warned about the threat to free expression. But others asked, what happens when powerful media platforms substitute cruelty for commentary? In court filings, Melania's team revealed internal strategy documents from the View staff. One slide in a PowerPoint presentation presented during a content strategy meeting was titled "Targets That Trend." Her name topped the list. Meanwhile, the hosts were instructed not to discuss the lawsuit on air. For a show built on opinions and outspokenness, that silence was deafening. Viewers noticed. Ratings dipped. On forums and fan pages, loyal audiences asked, why the sudden retreat? Where's the unapologetic fire? Behind the scenes, ABC's PR team was in damage control. Anonymous sources whispered to the press that internal tensions were flaring. Joy was reportedly furious at producers for not vetting the segment more carefully. Whoopi pushed back against the legal muzzle, claiming it violated her role as a commentator. Sunny curiously remained quiet. But the legal train wasn't slowing. During an early deposition, one junior producer admitted under oath that certain Melania clips were edited for viral punch. When asked to elaborate, he confessed, "We knew which phrases would enrage viewers. That's what gets shared." It was the first major crack. More followed. A former ABC contractor came forward anonymously. She claimed that Melania had been discussed in pre-show briefings not as a political figure, but as a ratings magnet. They didn't care if it was true, she said. They cared if it made people react. Legal analysts began speculating that the case could become a landmark ruling. If Melania won even partially, it would set a precedent for how entertainment media can reference and critique public figures. ABC's lawyers pivoted. They tried to settle quietly, floating the idea of a private apology and a confidential donation to a charity of Melania's choice. She declined. Her team issued a single sentence in response: "We do not seek compromise, we seek correction." Public opinion shifted. Even previously skeptical commentators began acknowledging the merit of her claims. A viral thread on social media listed every major instance where The View had mocked Melania without evidence, from mocking her accent to questioning her love for her child to ridiculing her Christmas decorations. The conclusion was sharp. When do jokes stop being jokes and start becoming defamation? In court, ABC made a risky move. They argued Melania was a limited-purpose public figure subject to parody. Her lawyers responded with dozens of examples of hostile personal attacks that went far beyond parody. One especially damning moment came when they played a clip of Sunny Hostin suggesting Melania married for money, not meaning. Melania's attorney asked, "Is that journalism or jealousy?" The courtroom fell silent. Outside, the media frenzy continued. Protesters gathered outside ABC headquarters. Some carried signs reading "Protect Free Speech." Others shouted, "Truth isn't a punchline." Polls showed a steady trend. The public was beginning to agree that Melania had been mistreated. Her approval ratings, once low, began rising, especially among younger women who saw her not as a political symbol, but as a woman reclaiming her narrative. And as discovery continued, Melania's legal team hinted they had more to reveal. They weren't just suing over one segment, they were building a case against an entire culture. The court granted access to 5 years' worth of internal documents, emails, planning calls, Slack threads. Suddenly, The View was no longer just a show, it was evidence. With depositions looming, producers canceled a week of tapings. Officially, a break for scheduling. Unofficially, panic. The lawsuit had moved beyond entertainment news. Now it was the lead story on every network. And Melania Trump, once written off as a reluctant first lady, was now positioned as the most dangerous plaintiff American media had ever underestimated. The courtroom smelled of leather and ink-polished oak desks glowing under the fluorescent lights as the next round of hearings began. Melania Trump didn't appear in person, her team advised against it, but her presence was unmistakable in every whisper and note passed between ABC's attorneys. This was no longer theater. This was war by testimony. Deposition after deposition revealed the ecosystem behind The View's editorial strategy. It was less a spontaneous roundtable and more a scripted theater of mockery targeting convenient figures. Several former employees confirmed a memo circulated in early 2020 encouraging producers to identify female political figures who generate polarizing engagement. The top of that memo, Melania Trump. One former guest coordinator described pre-interview notes provided to panelists. Frame Melania as passive or complicit, it read. Use metaphors tied to luxury distant silence. Another line. No, any reference to marriage should feel suggestive, not factual. These weren't guidelines. They were blueprints for character assassination. On the third day of hearing, Sunny Hostin appeared escorted by counsel. She looked calm, composed. But within minutes, her previous statements played aloud made that poise crumble. In one segment, she'd said Melania looked like she was blinking SOS in Morse code at state dinners. In another, she might be the only first lady whose silence is louder than her wardrobe. Melania's lawyer leaned forward. Ms. Hostin, did you have any evidence of Melania Trump being unwilling or unhappy in her role as First Lady? No, she said quietly. Then why say she hated it? I believed it was obvious. Belief isn't evidence. Joy Behar fared no better. Under oath, she was asked about her foreclosed condo comment. She defended it as comedic. The lawyer showed her ABC's own analytics viewer sentiment dropped sharply after that episode, especially among suburban women. So your comedy cost your show 120,000 viewers in 48 hours. Joy blinked. Apparently, outside the courtroom, media coverage turned feral. Every late-night host offered their spin. Conservatives used the case as a rallying cry against media double standards. Liberals mostly avoided the topic, hoping silence would cool the blaze. But the blaze only spread. A leak from inside ABC revealed internal polling conducted to measure the damage. The results were damning. Viewer trust in The View had plummeted 34%. Advertisers were pulling back. Two sponsors issued statements distancing themselves from recent comments made on air. Under mounting pressure, ABC executives met privately to draft contingency plans. Discussions reportedly included suspending one or more hosts, restructuring the show, or even replacing it entirely. That week, Melania's lawyers dropped a new bombshell. A series of internal text messages between two producers shown with redacted names casually joked about how easy it was to bait Sunny into saying something outrageous when Melania was the topic. We just give her the headline and watch the sparks fly, one wrote. Ratings gold. Melania's the piñata. The metaphor stuck. Social media lit up with the phrase, Melania, the piñata, some mocking others, furious. That weekend, Melania appeared at a women's conference in Dallas. It was her first public event in over 6 months. Her speech was brief but piercing. Speech is free, she said, but slander has a price. And I'm here to make sure the bill comes due. Back in court, Sunny Hostin tried a new angle. Her team argued that Melania's lawsuit threatened the First Amendment, but the judge, a seasoned jurist with years of media law experience, pushed back. Freedom of the press is sacred, he said, but we do not protect intentional harm. If your speech is weaponized, expect resistance. He denied ABC's motion to dismiss. Trial was officially set. The headlines grew darker. A New York Times columnist asked what happens when the joke isn't funny anymore. A former co-host of The View told Variety, "We built that show to empower women. Somewhere along the way, we started tearing them down." Melania's legal team moved to include punitive damages. They requested access to financial records, salaries, production budgets, ad revenue linked to controversial segments. ABC resisted. The court granted partial access. Then came the audit. A third-party media audit revealed that nearly 19% of all Melania-related content on The View included factual inaccuracies or unverifiable claims. For a news-adjacent program, that was disastrous. Meanwhile, public sentiment was consolidating. A majority of Americans, 54%, according to a Rasmussen poll, believed Melania had been treated unfairly by The View. Among women over 30, that number jumped to 63%. The case had turned. It was no longer about one woman, it was about a system where opinion masqueraded as truth, where clicks outweighed character, where ratings trumped responsibility. Melania Trump hadn't just brought a lawsuit, she'd put an industry on trial, and the verdict still to come. But every host now knew the next word spoken into a hot mic could be played back in court, and this time someone was listening. The courtroom gallery was packed when closing arguments began. For weeks, the nation had followed the twists and turns of the most unexpected defamation trial in daytime television history. Now every seat was filled. Journalists, pundits, legal analysts, and a handful of past television executives all leaned forward, notebooks in hand, prepared for the final blows in a case that had already changed how media institutions approach public figures. Melania Trump's lead counsel stood first. He wore a calm expression, the product of strategic confidence, not arrogance. As he spoke, the room fell into stillness. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this case has never been about political views. It's not about left versus right, blue versus red. It's about right versus wrong." He moved slowly, deliberately, gesturing toward the stack of documents that had been entered into evidence. "You've seen the memos, the strategy decks, the ratings reports. You've heard the testimonies. You know the pattern. You know what they did." He reminded the jury that Melania had not entered public service willingly, but through her marriage to a man who did, that she had chosen privacy over publicity, that her few public appearances were always dissected, sometimes mocked, but never as viciously or as calculatedly as when she became a recurring topic on The View. She didn't ask to be turned into a caricature, but when she became one, she was expected to smile and accept it, to be quiet, to let it go. He paused. She didn't, and that's why we're here. ABC's defense team followed. Their tone was more urgent, their pacing less composed. They reiterated that The View was an opinion show protected under First Amendment rights. That satire, parody, and commentary were long-standing traditions in American media. That if Melania won this case, every comedian, pundit, and podcaster could be vulnerable. But there was no laughter in the room, no nods from the press bench. The jury, composed of men and women of varied ages and backgrounds, looked exhausted. After final instructions from the judge, they retired for deliberations. For 2 days, America waited. Pundits speculated. Social media divided. Hashtags trended both in support of and against the show's host. The View suspended new tapings indefinitely. A guest host was brought in to manage pre-scheduled segments, but it was clear no one wanted to sit in that chair. Then on a gray Thursday morning, the jury returned. Melania arrived through the service entrance unseen. She did not enter the courtroom. Her team did. The judge asked the foreman to rise. "Has the jury reached a verdict? We have your honor." In the matter of Trump Beavery's American Broadcasting Corporation and named defendants, what say you? The room braced. On the count of defamation with malicious intent, we find in favor of the plaintiff. A gasp rippled across the chamber. On the count of reputational harm with financial damages, we find in favor of the plaintiff. More gasps. And on the count of punitive damages, we find in favor of the plaintiff. A silence so deep it bordered on reverent filled the air. The judge nodded solemnly. Damages will be awarded in the amount of $62 million with an additional $12 million in punitive penalties. The View's legal counsel sank slightly in their seats. Across the country, anchors broke into programming to announce the verdict. Some called it a triumph for personal dignity. Others warned of a dangerous precedent, but no one ignored it. Melania issued a written statement within the hour. Today's verdict was not a victory for me. It was a message to anyone who believes cruelty can be monetized. I remain committed to public grace even in private pain. I thank the jury for seeing what so many chose to overlook. The fallout was immediate. ABC released a statement expressing disappointment but respect for the judicial process. Behind the scenes, emergency meetings were called. The View's future was uncertain. Ratings had collapsed. Advertisers had disappeared. Trust had evaporated. In the days that followed, Joy Behar announced her retirement. Whoopi Goldberg declined to comment. Sunny Hostin released a video on social media defending free speech while acknowledging the pain her words had caused. None of them returned to the show. In their place, ABC began airing guest-hosted specials under a new title, Reflections. The tone was sober, the audience smaller. But Melania's case didn't just affect one show. Producers across the industry quietly reevaluated their editorial policies. Legal teams reviewed scripts. Comedians added disclaimers. Media outlets issued quiet memos reminding writers about the line between critique and character attack. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Years later, a journalism ethics professor would write that the Trump versus ABC case marked the end of the post-shame era in media. The public didn't ask for politeness, he wrote, but they demanded accountability. Melania Trump rarely spoke of the trial again. She returned to private life, choosing engagements carefully. But her presence lingered, not in headlines, but in policy manuals, in legal precedent, in every editorial meeting where someone asked, "Can we say that? Should we say that?" Because somewhere in the background of modern media, her lawsuit echoed quietly but permanently. The weeks following the verdict brought a rare quiet to the media world. What had once been a cacophony of late-night jokes, viral monologues, and inflammatory segments was now replaced with pause, recalibration, and a hesitance unfamiliar to the American infotainment machine. What would come next wasn't clear, but one thing was certain: the old playbook had been shredded. ABC's board convened behind closed doors, facing the difficult questions of accountability. Shareholder pressure mounted, asking why internal oversight had failed so spectacularly. Why had no one spoken up? Why had a culture of mockery passed for mainstream content strategy? The answers were less about individual culpability and more about systemic disregard systems that rewarded shock value and punished nuance. In the days after the trial, Melania Trump declined all interview requests. Her legal team issued a final statement: "Our client has no interest in victory laps, only in progress." But progress had already begun. A quiet shift unfolded across American media. Some producers began labeling satire more clearly. Morning talk shows adjusted their segment protocols. Guests were briefed more carefully. Legal departments met with programming heads to refine language around character discussion. More importantly, networks began listening to audiences differently. Surveys found that a majority of Americans still wanted bold, even critical commentary, but they wanted it based in fact, not assumption. Critique, not cruelty. They wanted their media informed, not weaponized. In schools of journalism, Trump vs. ABC became a case study. It appeared in ethics courses, law seminars, even media production classes. One professor summed it up best in a lecture: "This wasn't the end of free speech. It was a correction in tone, a demand for better aim." Melania herself faded from the headlines. She returned to Florida. Occasionally, she was seen at charity events. Her memoir sold modestly, not a blockbuster, but steady. She turned down offers to turn her legal story into a series or documentary. She never named names again. She didn't have to. Her silence had already spoken volumes, but behind that silence was a shift more profound than any ratings dip or headline reversal. For the first time in years, pundits hesitated before jokes. Writers reconsidered metaphors. Editors pushed back against segments that punched down. That didn't mean media softened. It meant media sharpened. A post-trial summit was quietly organized at the National Press Club 6 months later. Representatives from the largest network's cable daytime digital attended. Panels were held on public trust, ethics, legal boundaries. Melania was invited but declined. Her legal counsel read a statement on her behalf. "I do not ask to be protected. I ask only that the truth not be masked by performance. We do not need silence, we need discipline." In the audience, editors and producers nodded. Elsewhere, the former host of The View charted new paths. Joy Behar appeared in a limited-run podcast about aging and activism. Whoopi Goldberg focused on acting and theater. Sunny Hostin resumed her legal commentary work, this time with a disclaimer attached to every segment. Their reputations survived, but they changed. The trial had made them symbols, willing or not, of a deeper reckoning. The show itself never returned to its original form. ABC eventually replaced it with a hybrid program, part town hall, part roundtable featuring rotating guests, fewer hot takes, more context. It never reached The View's ratings highs, but it rarely sparked outrage either. Melania Trump, meanwhile, wrote again. Not another memoir. A column short, thoughtful, published quietly in a digital publication. She titled it Echoes. In it, she wrote, "The words we use carry. Sometimes louder than we hear them in the moment, sometimes not at all, until later, when they return unexpectedly in silence, in judgment, in reflection, echoes not of what we said, but of what we chose not to understand." The column was widely shared. Her critics called it distant, opaque. But her supporters and many in the media understood it for what it was, a closing statement not in court, but in culture. Years later, an independent report commissioned by the Center for Media Responsibility reviewed how coverage practices had evolved post-Trump versus ABC. Their findings were mixed but hopeful. While entertainment remains at the heart of broadcast commentary, the report read the tolerance for factless hostility has diminished. A new norm has emerged not from legislation, but from litigation. Not from censorship, but from consequence. In other words, the system had absorbed the lesson. Quietly. Permanently. And if Melania Trump never again returned to a podium or filed another suit or spoke of that trial again, it didn't matter. She'd already left her mark, not on politics, but on the broadcast culture that once dismissed her as nothing more than an accent, a hairstyle, a punchline. The final punch, it turned out, was hers. Not spoken, but heard. An echo in every studio, every edit room, every room where someone still dares to ask, can we say that, should we say that? And somewhere beyond the reach of the headlines, beyond the glare of the cameras, Melania Trump sits quietly. She doesn't speak. Because she doesn't need to.